Hello Internet, and welcome to a new tutorial. The Squelch sound is one of these holy grail, unmistakable, classic psychedelic sounds. Extremely easy to make. All you need is a saw or a square and a filter. And pretty powerful when used right. But the question is, how can we improve it? This second episode of Reinventing the Classics is all about answering this question. If you don't know what Reinventing the Classic is, I'll leave a link to the first episode right in the description. But in a nutshell, I'm revisiting classic psychedelic sounds and giving them a new modern look. But before we dive into this tutorial, if you'd like to support the channel, you can consider becoming one of my patrons, buy my presets on Gumroad, or just leave a like, comment, subscribe. Things like that help the channel a lot. Now, with that said, let's dive into this tutorial. This episode will be separated into three sections basically. One in Serum, one in Bitwig's Grid, and the last one with the virus. And with each one, I will show you how we can spice up the main exact sound differently thanks to the different characteristics of each of the synthesizers I'll be using. So here we are in Bitwig, and let's start with Serum. So I'll solo Serum here, and we have basically an initial patch. Now, unlike the first episode of Reinventing the Classics, I'll leave the initial saw and I'll just load an LFO shape I've created called Analog Drift. I've showed you how to create that in the first episode, and I'll just set it on the fine in here so we'll get this like analog drift just to spice the sound a little bit. So now we have this. Pretty cool. I'll take the first oscillator 2 octaves lower and I'll set the second LFO in here. I'll leave it on triangle and I'll make it modulate the pitch. And I'll set it to modulate at a speed of 1 bar. So now we have this. Nothing too special. I'll make it modulate 2 octaves. I'll do so by clicking on the value in here and I'll set it to 38. So now we have 2 octaves of modulation. Pretty cool. Now, a bandpass filter in here. Let's take bandpass 24, give it some resonance, and now I'll give it some drive, and I'll make it modulate. The same LFO will modulate the filter, but in the opposite direction, meaning when the oscillator will pitch up, the filter will close, and when the oscillator will pitch down, the filter will open up. Now we have this. Give it more resonance and a little bit more drive. I'll spice up the sound in Serum using the phaser. I think by now you know the phaser is one of my go-to effects to spice things up and actually add like a bite to the sound. Let's load the phaser in here, take down the internal depth of the modulation, give it some feedback, and I want this movement. We have this like sweet spot somewhere in here. Pretty nice. I love it. Now I'm going to add a little bit of distortion. I'll leave it on tube, just give it some drive. Pretty cool. Just gives it a tiny bit of bite, but you can use whatever distortion algorithm you like. Now to finish up the sound, I'll go to the filter in here, second filter, and I'll set it to what I consider one of the most underrated or unused filter types, which is the ring mount. And with it, I want to get something that sounds like this. Now, I want it to modulate just before it goes to this high frequency screaming kind of sound. So I'll add the LFOs to modulate something like this. Maybe I'll set it in the opposite direction. Perfect. Maybe I'll just add the distortion after the filter. I'll leave drive, less mix. Perfect. Now I'll add a delay, set it to 1/8 dotted, pretty lazy, ping pong. Filter it out a little bit, and the amp envelope in here, I'll set it to a shape that looks like this. Now with the kick and bass, we have this. And here you have it. We've just spiced up the Squelch inside of Serum. Now let's see how we can do it in Polygrid. Okay, so here we are in Polygrid. I'm going a little bit the lazy way and I'll just break down the patch. I won't repatch everything from zero just to make things simpler for this tutorial. If you prefer me to always break down patches and not really go into the construction mode, please leave a comment down in the description. So the patch basically sounds like this. It's basically Squelch too, so if I'll break it down, what we have in here, let's turn off everything. First off, we have the classic Squelch, everything controlled by the same LFO. Here we have our oscillator. I've used the Union one because it's supposed to emulate analog oscillators. And it's going to the silent key filter, which is basically my favorite filter module right now from Bitwig. It's set to bandpass 6, which is basically bandpass 18 decibels per octave. Really nice slope. I mean, I've never seen it before on a bandpass filter. With some resonance, the oscillator is set 2 octaves lower, and as I said, everything is modulated by this LFO in here. I'll add the phaser, and the phaser is set to the MF algorithm in here. As you might know by now, MF is my favorite algorithm from Bitwig's phaser. Color, or basically the frequency of the phaser, is being modulated in the opposite direction as the filter. So now we have this. Pretty nice. I've added a distortion just to give it a bite. And then I've sent everything into AM or an RM module. And this AM RM module is being modulated by this triangle oscillator in here. It's set to 1 octave higher than our main note, or basically 3 octaves higher than the main oscillator. And its pitch is being modulated by the same LFO modulating our main oscillator, but in the opposite direction and all the way up, basically 120 semitones. Now we have something that sounds like this. With the ring mod, we got this like kind of a beating feeling to it. If I'll set the modulation to the other direction, let's see what we have. We have like a digital sword kind of sound. I'll leave it the way it was. And then I've added a chorus. The chorus also is being modulated by the same LFO. And here I've set it to X2, full width, and with full mix we have this. Add some bites. And the last thing that I've done is I've added the mod delay in here. Now the mod delay is my favorite delay for creating kind of like a fake granular pitch shifting effect inside of the grid. Like if I don't want to build like a whole granular machine, the mod delay does it really well. So I've set the speed to the fastest in here, and I've modulated the delay offset in here with the second LFO that I've added in here. And this actually gave us this effect. Kind of like a granular pitch shifting kind of effect thing. I really love it. And this is just one way of reinventing a classic sound inside the grid. As you know, the only limit is your only imagination in here, and I would really love to see what you will make with this. Please share that with me on Instagram. I'll leave a link to my Instagram down in the description. Now let's move on to the third sound. So the third sound will be made with the virus. I've actually wanted to break down the patch in here, but I'll recreate it from zero and show you how I use the virus. So as the usual with the virus and me, we will use the second oscillator. So now we have something that sounds like this. And by default in the virus, the second LFO will modulate the pitch of both oscillators, so we don't need to use the mod matrix to route things. So what I'll do in here, I'll just set the LFO and the clock to 1 octave. I'll set to phase to 1, so basically it will re-trigger from the same position every time we will get a new note, and I'll make it modulate the oscillator pitch all the way up. So now I have this. Let's take the second filter in here, set it to bandpass. Now by default this is a 12 decibel per octave bandpass filter. I'll leave it just like so, and we want to hear only the first filter, and I'll give it some resonance. And exactly like I did with Serum and the Polygrid patch, we're going to modulate the cutoff frequency in the opposite direction as the oscillator frequency. So in here, I'll set it to cutoff 1, make it modulate in the opposite direction. Now we have this. Pretty cool. I'll take down the second oscillator an octave lower. Now we have this. Now I want to push things further. So first of all, we will use the ring modulation of the virus. Now the ring modulation of the virus is the first oscillator modulating the second oscillator. So we can turn the ring mod all the way up. We can actually take this oscillator lever all the way down. And I'll set the first oscillator in here to wave, because basically it can morph between a wave shape. We have 63, basically 65 wave shapes with sine triangle. By the way, I set it to triangle. Morph from this waveform to saw wave to a square wave. It can do that on all of the viruses. So I'll set it to wave, and I'll modulate the pitch of the first oscillator with this LFO here. Let's see if I'll take it one octave lower. Perfect, I really like that. We can go a little bit crazy and take the first LFO here and actually make it modulate the second oscillator frequency. This is one way to go beyond the default modulation amount. Like in here, we can go only to plus 63, but if you want to go more than that, we can just take the same source and set it to the same destination, and we will get actually more modulation amount. This is perfect for me. Let's go to the effects section in here and actually get these virus goodies out of this synthesizer. Now, the first effect I want to add is the phaser in here. I'll set the stages to 6, basically almost all the way up. Give it some feedback. I'll take down the internal LFO, just like so. Now we have this. Now I'm going to set the frequency to somewhere in here, and I'll modulate the phaser frequency with the first LFO. Give it some modulation. Now I have this. Change the spreading. Let's go to the LFO matrix in here. Make it modulate on the opposite direction. Now I have this. Cool. Give it a little bit more feedback and set the filter in here to serial 6, which basically will make it a 24 decibel per octave filter. Now I have this. We're starting to get something a bit more interesting, right? Now let's push things even further and use one of, I've really considered this an underrated section of the virus, which is the chorus. The chorus of the virus is an amazing sound design tool. Let's take the chorus, mix all the way up, take the internal LFO down, give it some feedback, set the delay somewhere in here, check this out. We already have something crazy going on, right? Let's go to the internal LFO here and let's modulate the chorus delay. I'll take it all the way up because I like to live dangerously. Set the feedback a little bit less. Okay, maybe I'll turn off this oscillator modulation pitch in here, and I'll actually switch the cutoff modulation just like so. Now I know it's the inverse of what I'm doing, but bear with me. If now I'll switch the oscillator pitch in here to the chorus feedback, and I'll set it all the way up, maybe I'll make it modulate a little bit more the cutoff, and I'll set it to 2 bars. See this really weird effect that we just got? Let's add a delay in here. I'll set it to 2.1. Feedback, set it to 3 on 8. Give it some mix. I have this. Maybe I'll set it to serial 4. And the last thing we can do is just take the sustain down, give it some decay. Now we have this. Maybe just give it some saturation here. I'll go with light. And yeah, this is how you do it in a virus. And this is actually one way of doing it in a virus that highlights the importance of the chorus effect in the virus. Because as I said, I really think it's underrated and people should use it more. The chorus on the virus is amazing. And yeah, also I've wanted to start including the virus in my tutorials thanks to the DSP 56300 emulation, which is completely free, as you know. So yeah, that's that. With this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. Have a great one.